Day by day, I'm getting a little bit more of myself back. And I gotta tell you, it's tremendously exciting. It's like being locked in a jail for 32 years, and you come out of jail and you just start experiencing all kinds of wonderful things that you were forbidden to have while you were in prison.
That happy voice is, of course, our friend Ted, a young man who at this point in his story was about to come face to face with a terrible mental disorder and share with us the high highs and low lows of his volatile lifelong battle. Now, with insights from Associate Professor at the University of Calgary, Dr. Thomas Radler, and Ted's brothers Vaughn and Peter, is the fourth and final episode of Years Without Rain.
Well, in the 2 months that followed my dismissal from the car dealership, I contracted the illness of schizophrenia. Now I've got my dictionary here, and I'm going to look up the word schizophrenia and give you the dictionary definition first. All right. A mental disorder characterized by disassociation from reality and a deterioration of personality. That's what the dictionary has to say. Now I'm going to give you the TED version of the word schizophrenia. So I'm just telling you how that disease affected me, because schizophrenia is quite different to a lot of people. One schizophrenic will suffer different symptoms than the next. So I'm just telling you what I went through when I came down with the illness, and you'll get a picture that way.
After a psycho-fueled run through the frozen streets of Thompson, Manitoba in 1993, Ted found himself first in hospital, then in jail, then handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser. Destination, the Mental Health Center in Selkirk, Manitoba.
I remember thinking that I was going to get claustrophobic with these handcuffs on. And I was praying like mad that God would keep me from flying off the deep end. Got in a plane, flew down to Selkirk. When I got to the mental institution, they took the handcuffs off, and then they left. I'm going to just spare you a lot of detail of what went on there. I'll just say that for the first month and a half, I was put into maximum security.
When we first listened to Years Without Rain, we thought maximum security sounded unusually cruel, but then realized that Ted was a strong, able-bodied, and at that point, delusional young man, easily able to inflict unintentional damage. Dr. Radler.
During the first stages of inpatient treatment, the focus frequently needs to be on safety, your safety, other people's safety, and then at some point your situation will have stabilized to the point where you no longer require an acute inpatient admission. And then obviously the big question is what should come next.
The whole process of going to the institution was to find a medication that was right for me. And there was a lot of work that went into that. Another thing I'll say was that it was a time where I was completely deserted by everybody that I knew. My family never came to visit me. People from the church never came to visit me. And if you thought that was bad, there's another aspect or a symptom that schizophrenics suffer, and that is that they get instructions from God. And this was quite confusing to me because I have a personal relationship with God in the first place. So So when my brain started taking over and acting as God, I quite readily believed it, quite probably quicker than most people. But it wasn't God, I'll tell you that. It wasn't.
With Ted alone in hospital, his family was made aware of his mental disorder. Ted's brother Peter.
Like I wasn't around. I was getting bits and pieces of information when I was working, but mom and dad were in contact, obviously, with the psychologist and everything, and they said that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And when I heard that, it's gonna sound bizarre, but I almost felt like it was almost a relief because it wasn't Ted. It was schizophrenia.
Ted's brother Vaughn.
Yes, and to be quite honest, I wasn't sure how to deal with schizophrenia. I was totally lost. So there was a rift, I guess you can say, that was created, and it could be a little bit on my part as well, as I can't put the whole blame, I guess you could say, on him. I had something to do with it too, but because of my ignorance of schizophrenia, I wasn't sure.
I remember one conversation we had with a psychologist. He was talking about even professionals, like they have a hard time to get a real pinpoint on what schizophrenia actually really is.
Even in the year 2024, as I said earlier, the diagnosis of schizophrenia, like is the case for most psychiatric diagnoses, is still based on clinical assessment, identifying symptoms, and then putting them together in a way that is compatible with one of the disorders. The goal is not so much to establish a clear diagnosis, but to help get your symptoms under better control and also to help you return to a more fulfilling and pleasant life.
One symptom that I had was something that the psychiatrists classify as delusions of grandeur. A lot of other schizophrenics have the same thing. And that simply means that the person suffering from schizophrenia has great, high, and mighty thoughts about themselves. For instance, I never knew that I said this, but I had two different people come up to me after I got out of the mental health hospital, and they told me that I had told them that I was going to be an ambassador to Iran. I was going to build a castle, marry a woman judge, yeah, and she was going to have her helicopter pilot's license, and we were going to go flying around together. And I also believed I was going to own a very large black horse. And God told me that one day I was going to be riding this black horse in the surf on some coastline, and I was going to be attacked by a killer whale. And I was going to defend myself on the horse and actually kill this killer whale with a bow and arrow. And oh, geez, all this is coming back now. Oh, let's see what else. I also believed that I was going to go to West Point and be an engineer on shipbuilding there. Then after I graduated from West Point, I was going to kayak down the Colorado River. And man, I had maps out in my living room and I was planning the whole trip. I was really into this. So you can see how the old brain, if left to its own accord, it can come up with some pretty interesting things.
Ted's interesting brain was about to face the tedium and uncertainties of treatment, a painstaking process that would prove to be one of the darkest and most difficult challenges of his young life.
It would be fabulous if we had some ways available to identify which medication is going to work best for which patient, but we're still bound to trial and error. We always hope that the first medication we use will be effective.
While the trial and error method is still our only option to find the most effective medication for each individual, doctors and caregivers are not starting from zero.
We do have medications that are effective in schizophrenia, and we do have a good idea how these medications work. Most medications focus on dopamine as a neurotransmitter because the simplified belief is that for a lot of people with schizophrenia, there's too much dopamine in certain parts of the brain and possibly also too little dopamine in other parts. We've believed that too much dopamine in parts of the limbic system causes what we call the positive symptoms, which is too much of normal experiences like hearing voices, having delusions. And we believe that the too little dopamine, which most likely is more of an issue in parts of the cortex, is responsible for negative symptoms.
Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, a naturally occurring chemical that communicates between nerve cells in our brains and bodies. When a nerve impulse arrives at the end of a nerve fiber in our brains, dopamine is released and causes the transfer of the impulse to another nerve, fiber, muscle, or gland cell. It's literally a transmitter and plays a key role in our movements, memories, pleasures, rewards, and motivations.
So most medications that we currently use affect the dopaminergic system. The older medications used to block the dopamine receptors in the brain. Now we have a newer group of medications that are called partial dopamine agonists, which are more like modulators. They have some dopamine-like properties but help to rebalance the dopaminergic neurotransmission in the brain, but they also work on the dopaminergic system.
30 years on, there is no telling exactly what type of medication worked for Ted, but it almost certainly involved his brain's dopaminergic system.
Well, most likely it would have been one of the dopamine antagonists, one of the antipsychotics of what we call the first generation. These can be very helpful medications for a group of people, but the problem with this group of medications was that they cause a lot of motor side effects.
Ted's brother Peter.
I remember going to visit him in Thompson. He was diagnosed and he was working at Ford and had his medications and everything was kind of going along. And he says, I really struggle with the medication. When he was talking to you, he just kept moving around. He couldn't stop moving. And he was always conscious of that. Physically, he could not control it. It was the medication side effect, apparently.
So we have newer medications that tend to cause less of the motor side effects that were typical for antipsychotics. But I'm also involved in clinical trials in the process of finding new medications that are going to be more effective and cause less side effects. We're hoping for a breakthrough to give people who suffer from schizophrenia the relief that they deserve.
Just sipping a coffee here, thinking about how to proceed with this next phase of Years Without Rain. And it occurs to me that I should explain to you the reason that I am able to even put this production together for you is because of medical science having advanced to such a point where they made and are making medications to give people with schizophrenia the freedom to live on their own and basically live a normal lifestyle. In my case, most people don't even know that I have the disease.
After 5 months of in-depth medical assessments and treatment trials, Ted was ready to again try life on his own. But while his mental challenges were now more or less under control, a whole gaggle of new personal challenges were about to begin.
In the spring of 1994, I was released from Selkirk Mental Health Hospital, given a bus ticket to go back to Thompson, and a month's supply of medication. In due time, I paid all the rent that I was backlogged on, and things were all squared up. One would have thought things got back to normal, when in fact, perhaps the biggest test was yet to unfold. Jim and Rhonda, I've once again come to the pages of my college dictionary, and the word that I have chosen to draw from is the word desert, because that was what it was like, not only in the hospital, but for an entire year after I got out of hospital and came back to Thompson. That's what my life was like. And I found one definition that spoke so close to home. Let me just read it for you. A place or environment that provides no stimulus to the intellect or imagination. Now, there's other definitions for the word desert, but that one says it quite clearly. Now, around about the 9-month mark of this barren wasteland that I was going through, it occurred to me to start reading the Bible from page 1 and go straight through right to the end. Now, doing this exercise didn't do me a bit of good. That is, until one night I got to about the middle of the Bible. I came to a verse, and for the first time in such a long time, such a dry time, such a time of waste, a small shot of spiritual water spilled onto the desert of my life. And it came in the form of these words: God withdrew from him in order to test him, that he might know all that was in his heart. The whole barren, lifeless, parched time was a test. That one little verse meant so much to me because it felt like it was a compliment from God. Because I had believed that because I was going through such a desert wasteland, I had done something wrong to bring this upon myself. And that was totally false. And so when I received this verse and realized that it was a testing, I was reassured that I was walking a pure life and that everything was going according to plan.
That is pure Ted, the efficient hunter, searching for reassurance that his life, like his rabbit's, hadn't been wasted. But even with that reassurance, his persistent negative symptoms kept his family from getting closer. Ted's brother Vaughn.
Well, when he returned to Thompson, I guess I thought that we could just pick up where we left off, but it seemed even more different because it seemed that he became even more loner type. Like, I remember seeing him in Thompson walking, and I asked him if he wanted to go for coffee. He said, no, he's busy. And then he just kept walking. So I'm already aware that he's got schizophrenia, and I wasn't sure if the medication that he was taking had anything to do with that. I did see other side effects of that, but I didn't know if that had anything to do with our relationship per se.
Ted's brother Peter.
All I know is when was not on his meds, it wasn't Ted. Because I remember the one time I visited him, he said, go to McDonald's and get us a couple of Big Macs. So I went there and I came back, buzzed the door, and he wouldn't let me in. And I was, okay. Sometimes he was paranoid. Sometimes he was very gentle.
Oh, he was. In more ways than I could ever understand. You know, and to see also how he touched other lives, like you and your wife. Like, to see that, to me, was very profound. And this schizophrenia that he dealt with was only a part of it. It wasn't his life. It was a part of it. And for him to be so honest about it and to be so detailed about it was amazing.
Yeah, I think that his struggle when he was off meds and he'd go into that world, there's obviously no struggle then because you're in that world. The struggle was when you're of sound mind and you know that you have this disease and you hear of things that you have done and you can't relate those to who you are. It seems like it's like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde going on in your head.
Of course, no one knows exactly what was happening in Ted's sometimes medicated brain, but something had placated his negative symptoms enough to finally allow him to close a few relationship gaps.
Yeah. Well, I guess the upshot of what I want to tell you next was that I got back with my parents. It was kind of neat, but I need to tell you something about my dad because up till now I've painted quite a dark picture of the man, and it was an accurate picture. But anyways, he was a changed man in his final years on this planet. He was the father I always wanted. Unfortunately, he died way too soon. He did not die in his time. And so I got to enjoy about a few months of relationship with my dad before he passed away.
After reconciling with his father, Ted continued to focus on his own healing, slowly learning how to deal with his very active, very volatile mind.
I never really had the capacity to feel before, but now I do. Not in a great way, but it's day by day, I'm getting a little bit more of myself back. And I gotta tell you, it's tremendously exciting. It's like being locked in a jail for 32 years, and you come out of jail and you just start experiencing all kinds of wonderful things that you were forbidden to have while you were in prison. One of these things that I'm going to tell you about is I found out that I have a capacity for public speaking. And now, like I've started a little ministry here in my apartment, making tapes to send out to people. So anyways, I'm learning about this capacity to public speak.
I think you'd agree that public speaking may have indeed been a valid career path for Ted. After completing Years Without Rain, he seemed more than qualified.
Jim and Rod, I'm a little emotional here. There's been so much that's gone into making Years Without Rain, and now it's come to an end. And just an interesting little side note, all the tapes have been made by candlelight. I waited till everything got dark in the evening and lit a candle, and all the recordings have been done by the light of a small fire. I have something that I want to close with. I'll just read it to you, and that'll be my goodbye and my closing words. Here it is. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who, at the best, knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those timid souls who know neither victory or defeat. Those immortal words were spoken by Theodore Roosevelt.
As Ted mentioned, the audio cassette tapes that make up this documentary were recorded as part of his coping strategy. They, like his practice of counting to 200, helped him manage symptoms. And, as Ted would say, they worked. Right up until they didn't.
We always try to help people find ways to cope better with what is going on with them, to give them some relief. And then it sounds as if Ted's case, making those recordings, was a way of dealing with his illness. But then ultimately, these coping skills were not quite enough to prevent the worsening of his illness.
I remember Ted's suicide note. One of the things he mentioned was that he was just tired of the struggle, and he asked everyone to forgive him for what he was going to do. And he knew it was a very selfish act, but he says, I just can't. I'm just tired. I'm just physically, mentally, just tired.
It can be very difficult for the outside world to understand what is going on in the mind of a person with schizophrenia and what ultimately led him to commit suicide. I always hope that people reach out for help because there's hope available. For most people who struggle with suicidal thoughts, they're not there all the time. They're not that severe all the time. They fluctuate, but during periods of very high suicidal ideation, people need to be in a safe place because otherwise bad things happen.
The building that he lived in, he jumped from the 10th story, and I didn't know how to deal with that either. But losing my brother to this disease, then actually losing my brother to suicide, that was a loss, but not as big as the one before.
And that's why this whole documentary and the series is important, because people need to talk about it. You need to confront it. You have to pull things from it and learn from them. People need to understand. And are we ever going to be able to fully understand schizophrenia? I don't know. But I think the more information people can learn from different people's experiences,
The stronger we'll be.
yeah.
Make sure that the affected individual gets help, but also make sure that you get help, because this is an illness that affects everybody, not just the person who experiences the symptoms. And somebody needs to be there for the people who suffer from psychosis. And sometimes you have to encourage them to keep on trying. Sometimes you have to call again to make sure that an appointment happens. Sometimes you need to make sure that people actually keep their appointment. Be there for them. Don't give up on them, because things can get better.
And I think one of the biggest things is you're not alone. You're not alone. And when I look back at our experience, I wish I would have put more into it, more time with him, or I just support.
Ted and I, we always had those things that we used to share, like in war movies or stuff that guys get into. And one of our favorites was Braveheart.
After his passing, Peter and Vaughn packed up Ted's 10th floor apartment.
But when I got up there, the movie of Braveheart was set out on the coffee table, and 2 empty beer bottles and 2 cigarettes. And I didn't know at that time what that meant, but later on, it came to me that that was me and him sharing that experience. And so with that, plus the memories that we made when we were younger, really kind of seemed to help me through that whole process. And I'm very, very thankful and very grateful to have had a brother like that. Despite his mental illness, I was very blessed and fortunate to have him as a brother.
Ted passed away on February 27, 2004, in Thompson, Manitoba. He was 44 years old. On many occasions since then, Rhonda and I have discussed the strength and honesty of Ted's story, each time agreeing that if anyone could humanize a disorder as dehumanizing as schizophrenia, Ted could. As you now know, he was a joyful and resourceful young man who wanted very much to be useful. we hope this story has been that for you. For us, those simple cassette tapes that Ted shared 30 years ago would not only work to help us reconnect with a friend, but would also bring the importance of mental health into sharp personal focus. A focus Rhonda and I maintained in the raising of our 3 boys and in every personal and community interaction since. In short, Ted's tapes changed our lives for the better. Thanks, Ted. Years Without Rain was recorded by Ted with additional recordings from Bailey Tallheimer. Music, sound design, and mix are courtesy of Bo Sherminsky at Ear Candy Studios. Our graphic design work is thanks to Janice Thalheimer at Bossa Nova Communications. The documentary was edited by Rhonda and Jim at Tallheimer Film with much help from additional family and friends. Thank you again to Vaughn and Peter, Dr. Radler, and a special thank you to Communication Specialist at University of Calgary, Ms. Kelly Johnson. For more information on schizophrenia or other mental disorders, please contact the Canadian Mental Health Association to learn about support and resources in your area. That's cmha.ca. Thank you for listening.